So we are now live. So I'm excited to have another RTD live talk. And today I have a special guest, Mr. Jayant Bhandari, who's currently in India. So I appreciate you taking time to join us here on Rethinking a Dollar and to chit chat a little bit and find out what's happening in your neck of the woods. Guest, Mr. Jayant Bhandari, who's currently in India. So I appreciate you taking time. Get a little feedback. It's okay. So we have one viewer, and so we can give it a couple minutes and whatnot. But as I was mentioning earlier, we're having a snowstorm. We had a snowstorm come through here, so kind of threw everything off. So looking forward to having a good conversation tonight. And definitely, I haven't had a chance to really follow up on much of the things happening in your neck of the woods. And so looking forward to you giving me the scoop on how things are developing with that whole currency situation as we move forward. So looks like we have about 6 or so people online. So for the most part, we can begin. So Jayant Bhandari, welcome to RTD Live. We've had a prior conversation in the past, and so I appreciate you taking some time to join me for a live episode.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
My pleasure, my pleasure. So as always, the typical format is to try to get the audience to chime in and share their thoughts and ask questions. And so you're a well-traveled individual. You've got your ears to the ground, so you know a lot about what's going on. And so I want to definitely get your opinion on everything. So in the midst of us talking, we might get a phone call, hopefully, and then you can answer a question or vice versa. So I want to kind of start this conversation off by welcoming some of the people. So we have Construct Dismal. It's a big fan. Hey there, buddy. How you doing? Tom Manley's on there. So guys, if you guys are interested, feel free to call in and ask anything in regards to monetary, the economy, or anything happening in the Middle East or anywhere in the world. I'm sure Jayant will be willing to answer it. So, but I have a question first off, Jayant, and I want to get your thoughts on, like I mentioned before, about what's happening in India. And so last time we spoke is earlier in the year. And so right at the same time, the whole currency situation of the higher denomination notes being removed. So if you don't mind, jump in right there and kind of give us an update on what's happening with the currency and those notes.
Right. So, Mike, what is actually happening is that this is just one of the visible expressions of tyranny and the police state developing in India. 2 days back, one person who was dating a Muslim guy who was dating a Hindu girl was killed, decapitated, and burnt. So this is the kind of tyranny developing in the country, and a lot of that has been encouraged by the government and the people, the Hindu fanatic party that runs and rules the country. Now, that is one aspect of the tyranny that is rising, and that is truly the real tyranny which people should pay attention to. Demonetization and change of the tax code were part of the same increase in tyranny. Both of them have been unmitigated disaster, and a very simple way to understand that is to look at the food prices in this country. I can get food for about 25 to 50% cheaper price than I used to get a year earlier. And the reason food prices have fallen so much is because a lot of poor people, or a significant part of the poor people, cannot buy food in enough quantity. 300 million people, as much as the population of the US, goes to bed hungry in this country, and that is just the official figure. My guess is that a lot more people go to bed hungry. And we have maids and servants at home, and once in a while, one of them comes to my mom and says, "Listen, I did not eat yesterday." So this is the problem of this country. It's an extremely poor and wretched country, and demonetization, over-centralization, change of tax code, increase in bureaucratization, and increase in fanaticism are a part of the same thing, which is increase in tyranny and increasing police state.
All right, so let me ask you a question. So prior to, I guess, last year or the year, I think about a year and a little bit over a year now, since everything kind of went down. So, so all the things you're naming now, has it increased and gotten worse since the whole shortage of cash? And so is there still a shortage of cash, or what type of alternatives have they rolled out to try to give the people some options, if any?
So things have been getting worse for the last 70 years. The day the British left this country was the day when things started getting worse. But everything has been getting worse very, very rapidly over the last 2 or 3 years. And there's a reason behind it. This is the first time that India has had a complete break from the British Empire. There is now virtually no one there's no one in the government today who has any connection whatsoever with the British.
Mm-hmm.
The end result is that the class is gone, institutions are getting degraded very rapidly, and what these people do is that they take assistance of people from the IMF and the World Bank, and they want to, these international organizations rationalize what these countries are doing. And India is just one of those many countries that are doing similar things. And this is nothing but centralizing and creating more of a totalitarian government, which will never work in these tribal countries. And that is the reason why, instead of benefiting demonetization and change of tax code, these things are making life very bad for people here in this country.
Wow, that's definitely not good news. I was expecting to hear something a little bit better in regards to, I heard something about they're trying to set up automated accounts for everybody. So let's talk a little bit about the financial system. So you said they were struggling prior to having their notes removed. Now they have very little options. What's up with I heard something about blockchain and possibly them looking at the digital wallets and some of that stuff that's happening over here. What are they trying to implement as far as giving people those type of options, if any?
Well, they have opened bank accounts for hundreds of millions of people. So it looks very good statistically. The reality is that those accounts have no money, which means that banks must face administration costs that relate to those accounts. And the people who make, say, something like $4 or $5 a day don't really have the time or patience to go to the bank to take $3 or $4 every day. It consumes a lot of bank time. It consumes a lot of the time of these people. And the reality is that corruption is so wide and deep in this country that it's hard to find a bureaucrat who is not corrupt, which means that these very poor people who supposedly get about $4, $5, or $8 a month, the money isn't usually in their accounts. So when I go out, I will see those 70, 80-year-old, very frail people sitting on the floor in the banks, begging the managers to get access to the money that they are owed. So this is the reality. But again, statistically, it looks very good because now you can say that we have opened bank accounts for hundreds of millions of people.
So if there's no money, as you mentioned, now one of the viewers, I think it's Busy Mountain, he said, what is the answer to India's problems?
Well, Mike, really, this is a very funny situation because not many people talk about this thing. The reality is that there is only one solution to India's problem, and that solution is for Europeans to return back to India and start to rule this country again. Mm-hmm. The reality is that this is the same situation with virtually every third world country today. Third world countries cannot be managed by the local people. These are superstitious, tribal, extremely, extremely backward people. Very irrational people. They cannot really have the capabilities or interest or understanding of the institutions that the British left behind when they left these third world countries, including India. So the solution is, firstly, either the Europeans to return back and rule India again, or for India to disintegrate. And India will disintegrate because that is the default future of the country, and that will indeed happen because Europeans are not coming back to rule this country. But what will happen, Mike, is that if India disintegrates and if African countries disintegrate and these third world countries fall apart into their tribal portions, this will result into never-ending tribal warfare, which actually existed before European Europeans colonized these countries 200-300 years back. Now, we blame Europeans for a lot of things. Europeans very, very significantly reduced tribal warfare in these countries. The result is that, let's say, Africa's population, which was only 46 million people about 200 years back, is now more than 1 billion people, because people are not hacking each other to death anymore. And the same will happen in India. So what is happening is India will, in my view, disintegrate eventually, because Europeans are not in a position to return back to India and rule this country. And this will lead to a complete chaos. India is very rapidly becoming the next Pakistan, and Pakistan is getting worse by the day anyway.
Wow. Okay. So we have, Jayant, we have a viewer, we have a caller. And so, caller, are you there?
Yes, sir, I am. How are you today?
I'm doing excellent. I appreciate it. Give me one second, cut the mic up so I can hear you a little bit better. All right, go ahead. What's your name and where you calling from, buddy?
Hey, my name is Eddie, and I'm calling from Central America.
You calling from Central America, Eddie?
Not Central America down south. I'm talking about Central America, U.S., Central U.S.
Okay, Central U.S. Okay.
My question is a quick one. I'll ask it and then hang up.
Okay.
Americans as a whole don't seem to take precious metals very seriously. You know, we have some stackers within the community, and of course, great advice from your show. It's fantastic. I love it. And I was just wondering what Mr. Bhandari sees on an international level. If he sees the same kind of ignoring of precious metals, does it mean more to people out there? Are they collecting more? And thank you very much.
Our pleasure. Now, Jayant, did you hear that?
Yes, I did, Mike. The reality, Mike, is that America had all the reasons not to be interested in precious metals. Europeans had no reasons to be interested in precious metals. And the reason is that these economies were doing extremely well for the last 200 years. And if the economies are doing so well, your money should go into building infrastructure and factories, because that is actually generating a positive yield for you. So there's a legitimate reason why these people were not interested in gold. So I know a lot of gold bugs call Europeans and Americans naive, but they are not naive. They had a real legitimate reason why not to invest in gold. Gold is a zero yielding asset, and it actually consumes money in terms of protecting it. But the situation is now starting to change. It has been changing for the last 20 or 30 years in the Western countries. What is increasingly happening is that the economic growth rate is falling, coming closer and closer to zero. Yields on your investments, and I'm talking on a risk-adjusted basis, is becoming zero and mostly negative yielding today. So if you want to put your money in a bank account in the US, you have a negative return on your investment in real terms. The same is happening in virtually every European countries. So for the first time in the history, the modern history of the Western countries, you really have access to real yields. 30 or 40 years back, you could get as much as 10% interest rate on your deposits. I would have been very happy keeping my money in a bank in that kind of situation. But now people are chasing yields. They are putting their money in the stock market without thinking about it. They are putting their money in cryptocurrencies. They are trying to protect their money as much as they can. And this is like a person drowning who has no focus, who has no discipline, and quite rightly, because these people are just completely confused. They have no yield from the savings they have. And the result is that at the end of the day, they will realize that gold must become a part of the strategy to protect your wealth, because gold is a zero yielding asset, but at least, Mike, it is not negative yielding. So in comparison to negative yielding, gold is a very good wealth protecting device to own.
Right. Now, I want to add, because to go back a little bit towards your thoughts about how India, and then I'm going to read some comments here, and it talks about tribalism and how India, and I forgot exactly how you said it, but yet you painted a very not so bright future for India in regards to the current trends that's happening now. So my question is, with all the recent developments of the Eastern countries, primarily with the whole Silk Belt and Road Initiative, as well as Russia and China agreements and whatnot, and everyone kind of shifting towards China for support / the restructuring for the future. Will India play in part in any of that, being that you're the highest populated country, and they're primed for a lot of development there? Do you see China and any countries over there kind of assisting for that next leg of development down the line?
So firstly, Mike, when I painted the picture of India and it sounds very negative, remember that I live a very cocooned life in India when I'm here. Mm-hmm. I mostly spend my time in North America and living elsewhere in the world. A lot of very poor people come to me and tell me that the situation is far worse than what I paint. Because really, a lot of what I know about India is from watching through the glasses of my chauffeur-driven cars. So I don't really experience the problems of India on a daily basis. Most Indians live lives worse than that of cockroaches. Wow. Now, and I said cockroaches, yes.
Right.
Now, about East Asia, among the third world countries, among the developing countries, the only countries that are actually doing well, Asian countries, particularly China. There's virtually no crime in Taiwan, Singapore, Hong Kong, South Korea, and Japan. And I spend a fair bit of my time in these countries. And China is the only third world countries that is actually growing because of its inner competencies. What India should have done is become a back office of China. Listen, there is no other option for India. India should have participated in this one road, one belt policy initiative of China. And China is actually, despite the fact that Chinese are no saints, they are making Africa and the Middle East more stable than it would have been without China. Again, Chinese are not saints in any way, but again, in life, we don't have perfect solutions. We have relative solutions, and China is much better than in terms of bringing stabilities in these countries. India should have become a passionate participant in opening up trade with China, but there's a huge amount of nationalism and egocentricity within Indians, and international organizations encourage it. They want to make Indians feel superior to Chinese because India is a so-called democracy, but really, India is a mobocracy. Mm-hmm. Now, Indians feel much superior compared to China. But the reality, Mike, is that I go to China quite often. And whenever I go to China from India, I have to pinch myself to tell myself that I'm not in a first world country when I'm in China. Yeah. China is so much richer and advanced compared to India. Chinese GDP on per capita basis is more than 5 times that of India. India is not comparable with China. India should become a back office of China, but again, that is not happening. And apart from the fact that, given that Europeans are not going to come and rule India, and because China is bringing a stability in Africa and parts of Central Asia, China can actually bring a stability to India as well. But again, there's so much of nationalism and egocentricity involved in this thing that Indians will not let that happen.
Yeah. Now, I want to touch on China just a little bit since we're, that's in the conversation now. What are your thoughts about everything that's unfolding? Like a lot of times I mentioned that all the problems we have here in the West, especially with this Bitcoin craze and everything else, it's more so like one of many topics to kind of keep our attention on this side of the globe, where on that other side, closer to where you're at now, there's already plans and there's already a structure for after this monetary reset or monetary crash or whatever, some people call it. So do you think, the developments and recent developments of the last decade or so for China has prepared them to take lead in the next monetary system? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm not sure about the monetary system because China is a new country in a way. It started opening up to the world only about 25 years, 30 years back. It's a country that has very recently become rich. It is a country that was not internationalized at all 30 years back. And Chinese are rapidly internationalizing themselves and diversifying themselves. So this is a new guy in the block. It will take China a fair bit of time before the world starts to trust China and before China develops competencies to deal in international affairs. Now, remember, Switzerland is a very sought after country for many people because it has taken Switzerland maybe 500 years or more to establish credibility. Singapore is a relatively new country. In my view, Singapore is better than Switzerland in many ways. But so what? It takes hundreds of years before we start trusting a nation because we need time to start trusting the society. So China will take a fair bit of time before it becomes the backbone of international monetary system, in my view. But I'm no expert in this thing, but this is what I think will happen.
Right. Now, in the meantime, there's a lot of things happening on this side, which is kind of causing a lot of people to say that, the reset or, so what are your thoughts on the next shift? So I sometimes said a paradigm shift where the Federal Reserve note will no longer hold the credibility that it has held for so long because of, the manipulation with, quantitative easing, all the things that we've been doing here just to stay afloat. What are your thoughts on this transition? Will there be a transition and how will that kind of look and who will play a major role in that? Walk through some couple scenarios of how the next couple of years will play out, with all the east to west power shift, if that happens.
Well, so America is still the best country in the world. I was in the US 3 days back. I spent a fair bit of my time in the US. US is still one of the most free and the best economies in the world. American dollar is looked upon as gold by people in countries like India or people in countries like China. So American dollar is still a very strong pillar. This is not going to go away anytime soon. But the reality is that these institutions, the whole concept of the government, the whole concept of overregulation and centralized money cannot stay on forever because it's a fake concept. It's a concept that's not natural to the society. And American society has printed far too many of their paper. And a lot of these third world countries have bought a lot of those papers because the currency in these countries have no value. They are paper. They are untrustworthy currencies. But the reality is that with the economies stagnating in these countries in the West, including in the US, eventually dollar will lose its value, and that is reflected in what is happening in cryptocurrencies. People are buying so much of cryptocurrencies that now I think the total market capitalizations of cryptocurrencies is close to $500 billion. This is absolutely crazy number.
Right. I do agree. And I was thinking about that earlier, how, $500 billion is, a very small amount in comparison to I think it's 200, 300 trillion dollars worth of fiat currency that's been printed, by all governments. So if people are rushing to get out of fiat currencies into cryptos, then there could be a lot of opportunity for those cryptos to continue to go up. Now, my question is, what are your thoughts on this cryptography, blockchain technology? Clearly, it's going to be implemented as a part of our future. So, I asked a lot of people, and it's just opinion piece, but do you think this the introduction of this technology was by design or was it by default at this point in time over the last 10 years because of this last great recession we had in the US? What are your thoughts?
the people who designed blockchain and Bitcoin are the saviors of our society. These people have told the governments that, listen, you cannot continue to over-centralize and increase tyrannies, because we will create a way for people to bypass the governments. And cryptocurrencies is a method through which it's a safety valve. It is telling governments that, listen, you have to stop over-regulating us. And this is a reflection. This is why so many people are moving into cryptocurrencies. So I have a huge respect for these people for what they have done. However, Mike, why should I invest in Bitcoin? I thought at $10 it was too expensive. At $15,000 or $20,000, I still find it too expensive. The reality is that I'm a value investor. Something has to have an underlying value. Despite the fact that I love blockchain technology, which can actually be cloned very easily, is a great technology, and it is going to save us from a lot of problems going forward in terms of transactions between ourselves. A technology I love, and there's a lot of growth opportunities because of this technology. But as far as specifically cryptocurrencies are concerned, there's no backing of these currencies. You can use them for immediate transactions, but holding on to these cryptocurrencies would give me very sleepless nights. I did not buy Bitcoin at $10, and I am, of course, not buying now. I might look like a fool, but the reality is, if I don't see value, I take too many risks.
Right. Now, that's a very good point. I do understand that. Now, early on, you were talking about how, because people are chasing yield, they're getting into it. And so if you have a bank account, for example, with $1,000 in it, and you know that nominally you're losing purchasing power by letting that money stay stagnant, because you're not going to get, $1,000 back if you try to come back a year from now. So the idea of taking that $1,000, trying to put it into, any type of token that isn't just increasing in nominal value, that, is what I think is driving the idea that people are, as you said, chasing yield. Now, the question is, with this technology of the blockchain, there's a lot of, big banks, too big to fail banks is working on their own types of blockchain technology. And then the government as well is not going to stand by and let this happen without them saying something. So give me your thoughts on, what this upcoming year, do you see any type of regulation / government, dealings that might kind of alter this, or are they kind of just going to sit back and watch this ride because it keeps us distracted as of now? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think a lot of central banks around the world are peeing in their pants right now. Cryptocurrencies have made them extremely scared. And again, I have a huge amount of respect for cryptocurrencies and blockchain for doing this to the society. It has been a huge service. Governments can no longer control cryptocurrencies. These are not controllable. These are decentralized currencies, and that is what we should have as money. Money should be decentralized. These are decentralized currencies. No central bank has the power to control these currencies. They might be able to create fear, short-term fear about cryptocurrencies, but now they are no longer in a position to do so. They might have achieved that 5 or 10 years back, but this is too late for them, and I'm very happy about it. Again, I must repeat, that does not mean I would invest in Bitcoin. I own no cryptocurrency at all, but I'm very excited about the future of blockchain technology.
Right, understandable. Now, let me ask you another question in regards to the whole cryptography, blockchain type things. Now, as of the last couple of weeks, especially, a lot of the exchanges, CBOE and the CME and a couple other ones out there are all rushing to get a product out into the line in the form of futures contracts, this month. So we had just recently, this past Sunday, CBOE. Next week, we got the CME, and then ABCD, DDD, they're all coming down the line in the next couple of weeks. Why is this rush before the new year, in your opinion? If it's by coincidence, or is there some type of, meaning behind it? What do you think?
Well, I mean, there is so much of cash right now chasing cryptocurrencies, and this is, I think, a huge problem with today's society. a lot of fund managers don't want to lose in comparison to the index, and they have to do what the rest of the world is doing, which is that they have to follow the herd themselves. And so this is again a bubble in a sense that I did not find value in at $10 in Bitcoin. Now it's $15,000 or $20,000, and on top of that, you are creating a leveraged product. This will not end well. I hope people understand that they have to become rational thinkers. They have to stop believing in superstitions. They have to stop investing in bubble, or this will again fall into a crash at some point of time in the future.
Yeah, a good point. I do. Yeah, I'm torn back and forth because I see, so much value in the technology, as you mentioned, and then the idea that people are dumping paper to get into it. Now I can really see the government and banking industry kind of really plan on finding ways of keeping people in it directly where they can't get out and exchange it for fiat. So people will try to be forced to try to exchange it for goods and services directly. And I see more retailers now beginning to adopt ways of adding it as a form of payment. Now, do you see it in an intermediate term being being adopted by more retailers to where once the retailers start accepting it, then that kind of gives it a sense of legitimacy to where it's going to be hard for government and regulators and banks to kind of say, oh, hey, stop doing what you're doing when major corporations are accepting it. So do you see that kind of helping it get a little bit more longevity out of its usage?
Well, again, I don't own cryptocurrencies, Mike, but from what I have read, it seems that the transaction costs are becoming extremely large when people try to use Bitcoin.
Right.
I was reading it goes up to as much as $20, $25 in terms of moving money from one person to another. So firstly, Bitcoin is failing on two respects. One is that transaction costs are not zero. There are transaction costs. And the second thing is that the supply of Bitcoins is not limited in the real sense, because now you have almost 2,000 cryptocurrencies. And one Bitcoin does not mean just one Bitcoin, because one Bitcoin can be subdivided into 10,000 times or something, 0.00041 Bitcoin. So really, the problem is that there is an unlimited supply of cryptocurrencies that can be created. All you have to do is to clone another cryptocurrency, and that's a very easy software mechanism through which you can create a new cryptocurrency. And you do have transaction costs, because who will bear the cost of running the supply going forward? So again, it's not that cryptocurrencies don't have problems, and they might have a lot of the same problems that fiat currencies have.
Okay, good question. And so it looks like we have a caller. Caller, are you there?
Yes, I am. Good evening, RTD fam, Michael and Mr. Bhandari. My name is Bobby. I am Bank Chief, all is one. I was just wondering, if you don't have anything invested in the cryptocurrencies or Bitcoin, if the banks came together and had their own cryptocurrency and you knew it was from the banks, would you then invest your money into those?
No, I would not. I ideally, Bobby, would like to have my cryptocurrency backed by something real. Now, maybe I'm an old-fashioned guy. Maybe I have my own blocks. The reason why I cannot think about why something does not have to be backed by something real. But I want my cryptocurrency to be backed by something real. So assume that suppose one Bitcoin were backed by 10 ounces of gold, or a certain tonnage of copper. I would have much more trust in owning Bitcoin then, because then my electronic cryptocurrency can be redeemed into something real. If a bank does that, I will happily do it. But the problem is, why would banks do it? Because banks cannot make money from this whole process. So I don't see why banks will do it. They will destroy their own industry by doing it.
You had another question?
I understand. Would you Well, would you just then, would you go ahead? I mean, does it make any sense to go ahead and also not only have some invested in, say, physical metal and then, or any kind of precious metals, and then maybe curb it a little bit and have some in cryptocurrencies just in case?
Yes, I have been, Bobby, told by several people that I should have invested at least a couple of $100 in Bitcoin a few years back, and I would have made hundreds of thousands of dollars, or a huge amount of money if I had done that. The reality is that we should never look into the past to project the future. So the problem is that I cannot project into the future what might happen. I have to still invest based on the value that I see. And as an investor, as a financial analyst, I must have two things with me before I invest in something. I must have a buy price and I must have a sell price, which means that I should have two limits within which I think the value of that entity lies. In case of cryptocurrencies, I don't know what those limits are. Is it $1 million per Bitcoin, or is it $0 per Bitcoin? So that is the reason why I don't invest in it. Should I have? If I could turn the clock back, I would invest. Should I do it now? If Bitcoin falls to $10 tomorrow, would I invest? No, I would not.
All right, caller, last question or last response?
Yes, understood. But would, say someone that put some money into it before, say $100, and they made a lot of money off it now, and they just took that and say gave it to APMEX for some silver or gold. Now that would, essentially be making money out of nothing, wouldn't it be in your definition?
Not necessarily. I mean, I'm very happy for these people who have made money. Once you know that it's time to sell, you should sell, make money, and move on. We should have a valuation, an objective valuation. And if you were lucky, if you made money, luck happens to those people who are prepared. And I'm very, very pleased. Again, I'm not bad-mouthing cryptocurrencies. I'm extremely happy about cryptocurrencies. And I'm very happy for people who have made money. But we have to keep in mind that if cryptocurrencies crash tomorrow, it will damage the whole future of cryptocurrencies for 1 or 2 decades. We should help cryptocurrencies get sane, rational foundations rather than let it become a bubble, because then it will destroy the benefits that cryptocurrencies have brought to us.
All right, caller, thank you for having called in for our last caller. Sorry to cut you off, but I had another call coming in. So, new caller, what's your name and where you calling from?
Alan, I'm calling from Alabama.
Alan from Alabama. Thanks for calling me, my friend. What's on your mind?
Well, there's a lot of things that are on my mind. One thing that I discovered about gold was that there's a statutory value for it and there's a market value for it. And the statutory value of gold set by the government is $42.20 an ounce, and silver is $1.40 an ounce. And that value is still current to this day. I don't think that we're ever going to have a currency again backed by any type of commodity. And one of the reasons for that, I think, is that technology is advancing at such a fast pace that because of the exponential growth in that technology, you get a deflationary effect in almost every aspect of everything. So that's one reason I don't think you're going to have any currency backed by a commodity. And I'm looking at the singularity and how fast technology is advancing. I'm looking at genetics technology, robotics, nanotech. All of that stuff is very concerning. Any thoughts on that?
Thanks for that question.
I actually completely agree with everything you have said. Yes, I don't see gold becoming money anytime in the future. In fact, gold should have ceased to come to exist by today. The problem today is that our federal banks have taken us to an era which is more backward than the Stone Age times. For the first time in human history of the last thousands of years, we have currency that has no value, which is just a piece of paper, nothing else. So what I'm doing when I'm investing in gold and copper is not in expectation that gold, copper, or silver would become money in the future. For me, it is a way to protect my wealth and increase my wealth going forward. What will happen is that when the third world go into a major crisis, and when Western countries go through a major crisis, people will scramble again to find ways to protect their wealth. And gold and silver will become a commodity that they will use as a stepping stone. And again, I agree, gold and silver is not going to be money in my view in the future, but it will still be a stepping stone. And what I'm looking forward to is what I can do which can increase my wealth tomorrow. It does not mean I want to imagine the scenarios that will convert gold and silver into money 5 or 10 years from now. I'm only interested in making money, and gold is a stepping stone for me.
All right, fair enough. Caller, do you have another question or a follow-up with that?
I do. Thank you. I've looked at the monetary system, and I look at it as a fabricated system of control. And it's the oldest tool of colonial powers is to rob people of their ability to exist outside of their system. And their system is using the only way you can survive in that system is to work and earn their currency, and then you're controlled by that group of people. So to me, it's a fabricated system of control. And then I'm looking at, we're having to enter into, humanity is entering into a new age. And, you know, if we reach this financial apocalypse everybody is talking about, you know, we can't be dwelling on the old ways. We have to go into a whole new age for humanity to move forward as a whole. Has any thoughts?
Thanks for that, caller. Thanks for that.
Again, I agree with you. I agree with you. But really, the problem is that the government are an unnatural concept. We, as human beings, should not be governed by anyone. That does not mean we should not have rules, but I don't see why these governments and these tyrannies should exist. But the reality is that it's easy to blame everything on the government. Ask the guy next doors. And the reality is that virtually every person you will meet on the street wants more government, more police, more people in uniform than we have today. So the reality is that the problem is with the people in your society. And again, America is one of the freest societies even today. Go and meet people in Africa or the Middle East or in South Asia or Latin America, and you will see that they want a massive government. They want nanny governments with capabilities and rights to do pretty much anything to the society. So unfortunately, the real problem is with the people, not with the government. Government tyranny would cease to exist if people wake up, but people are getting more sleepy, not less sleepy right now.
Right, I do agree. That's a good point there. Now let's turn the conversation a little bit. I want to talk about some other events happening around the world, which kind of ties into your last statement about how people want government to kind of do, play a part in their lives because we've been conditioned to think that government should have a role in our lives. Now, down in Zimbabwe, I've kind of followed our situation as much as I can because I think it's a great scenario of how hyperinflation gets out of control and destroys everyone's wealth and everything else. Share with me your thoughts on what's happening down in Zimbabwe. I know you keep an eye on that as well. And then also, give me some similarities to Venezuela as well right now. Them both dealing, or one coming out of hyperinflation, probably heading back into it, and the other one currently in hyperinflation.
Well, as I said, these are not isolated events. What's happening in Venezuela and Zimbabwe are not isolated events. This is a part of a trend that the third world is facing right now. These countries are imploding. Venezuela is imploding, and it will continue to implode. The only future for these countries, to save these countries, is for Europeans to go back and rule these countries. Zimbabwe 5 years from now will look much, much worse than it looks today. And I know a lot of people see Mugabe as a tyrant who is too old and who is too controlling. And that is very true, Mike. The reality is that Mugabe was put in his place by the British colonial powers. There was a rational background how he came into existence. Zimbabweans themselves are completely incapable of finding any person better than Mugabe to replace him. The end result will be there will be infighting, there will be an explosion of corruption and an explosion of chaos in Zimbabwe over the next few years. And I know I sound like an idiot right now, but you only have to visit this again 5 years from now. Zimbabwe will be a chaos, a much worse chaos 5 years from now. Remember, exactly the same thing happened in East Timor, Sudan, Nepal, Myanmar. People were very excited about these countries when dictators and tyrants and military dictatorships and the monarchs left their positions. The situation only gets worse in these countries because Western institutions, without Western people running those institutions, do not work. Now, I am saying this based on a huge amount of experience I have traveling around the world. I go around the world 3 or 4 times a year. I travel about 6 to 8 months a year. And I have been arrested in Zimbabwe. I have befriended a cousin of Mugabe. I spent a couple of days with a cousin of Mugabe. So I have had an inner look at what is happening in Zimbabwe. And that gives me, again, the same view that Zimbabwe is going to be no better than it is now into the future.
Right, and so like the new leadership, you know, it's exciting because it's change. Everyone wants change, but everyone not sure what they're getting themselves into as far as change is concerned. Now we're talking about the difference between, you know, third world and the world leaders. And so we have, you know, the Eastern powers or Western powers and the European nations are all considered, you know, first world status. So do you see a time when there will be a shift to where some of those third world countries will have a revitalization where they'll be able to experience some livelihood of the developed nations? And then do you see any developed nations suffering the fate of, let's say, a third world type of event or third world status because of some type of catastrophic event, predominantly, you know, referring to the United States of America?
Indeed, Mike. Western countries is still the best places to be in. However, they have lost their rational and moral anchoring. So in my view, the Western countries will continue to degrade and decay over the next few decades. And this decay will pick up pace as time goes by because they have lost their rational moorings. The institutions are no longer run by rational people. They are run by mobs, which is democracy. There is a third world area that is actually going, in my view, to be the future of humanity, and that is East Asia. I see very good hopes from China. China has historically been the world leader in many ways. It was the richest place for most of the modern human history of the last few millennia. And it wasn't for the last couple of 100 years, but China will, in my view, go back to that position. Now, of course, a lot can go wrong with China, but if I have any hope for the future of humanity, that is from China. I also am very optimistic about a lot of other East Asian countries, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, Hong Kong. These countries have their own problems. So don't misunderstand me here. They have their own problems. There's no perfect human society. But these societies have a lot of good to offer to humanities. They have virtually no crime. You can't find drugs in these countries. People are polite. In Japan, when I sit on a train, I have yet to come across a train which was late by even 1 minute. And very interestingly, Mike, when I sit on a train seat, the person in front of me invariably always asks me, as long as he's a Japanese, if he can recline his seat. Now, that is the kind of politeness that exists in those societies. If you travel in Singapore and Hong Kong in public transportation, you will see that no old person ever stands there. No pregnant woman ever stands there. In fact, the seats for the reserved seats actually stay empty even if the compartment is completely full. People are extremely polite, and I think that creates a very good base for these societies to continue to improve. They have their own problems, but I'm very optimistic about East Asia. So that is where I think the future of humanity and the future of Western civilization is. Western civilization has been the best thing humanity has ever created, but the West is very rapidly, or at least slowly, losing Western civilization. But I'm happy it is moving on to greener pastures.
Right, fair enough there. Good, and I do agree that things are shifting east. Not aware of the cultural aspects of how polite and how respectful the youth are of their elderly. Here in the Western world, our youth is so far gone as far as just being so disrespectful, and we've the younger generation especially have developed a mindset of entitlement, thinking that everyone owes them something, and so it shows up in our youth with the lack of respect for the elderly. So that's true signs of a decline in civilization, in my opinion. Now let's turn a little bit to some geopolitical events. And so, the Middle East is a hot topic. It's going to always be a hot topic, unfortunately, because as you can see on my shoulder here, on this side, I have the oil. And so petroleum is going to be the hot topic for years to come. Share with me your thoughts on what's happening in Saudi Arabia and how Saudi Arabia just made their first visit east to work out some deals with Russia as well as in China. So what are your thoughts and how will this, the energy sector, be changing in the next couple years or decade or so?
In my view, Mike, the Middle East and Africa is on a path to a major crisis going forward. And the problem is that these are very tribal people. They don't really have productive capacities themselves. A lot of people in the Middle East became very rich. Nigeria, a lot of Nigerians became very rich. And the reason is not because of their humanist skills. It was not because of the social competencies these people created. They became rich because oil gave them access to free money from natural resources. Now, that free money is no longer as much as it was a few years back. I have never met anyone who has been able to predict the future of these energies in the future. So people project the future of uranium or oil or gas, and they have been consistently wrong. However, there is a lot of oil and gas in the world today, and there are a lot of projects in the US and Canada that can be brought back into production if oil and gas price rise. So there is almost certainly a limit above which oil and gas prices cannot go, because a lot of projects and fields in America and Canada will become profitable above a certain price of oil and gas. This tells me that the future of the Middle East is not very good. These people have become lazy. They have failed to develop their human competencies. They have become increasingly fanatic. Now, a lot of people blame Saudi Arabia for not being democratic in the Western world. They don't really realize that if Saudi Arabia became democratic, it will become far worse than it is today. Because then the mob psychology will run that country. Saudi Arabia is much, much better off as a dictatorship than as a democracy. And I hope people understand that. However, the reality is that these countries need backbone of Western support to stay as a country. And I can understand why they need American army to keep them in line, keep them together. Now, of course, this is not a reason, there's no reason why you should be taxed to support Saudi Arabia. But the reality is that these countries will disintegrate without American support. Trump is, of course, slowly pulling back from getting involved in international affairs. And I think that will not necessarily be too good for a lot of these countries.
Right now, the whole, the war drums from the United States of America has been beating for years. We're still in Afghanistan. We're still defending the free world, as we call it, fighting for freedom everywhere. Because everyone who opposes us, happens to have terrorists pop up in their country. And so, beyond the oil situation, we have war. We have this event with Syria. We have the whole nuclear situation with Iran. So do you foresee, there being some type of need for war, because it is it is profitable, but B, it gives us something to do, give the United States something to do outside of our own country to kind of show that we are still the dominating, force or whatnot. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, America is, of course, on a relative basis, becoming less and less dominant. And I think there's an increased approach from the society to reduce trying to influence the world. The wars will happen. A lot of wars will happen. A lot of civil strife will come to exist. But that will exist not because of America, that will exist despite America. As I said, most of the third world, actually, except for China, everything in the third world will have their tribal conflicts, and this will lead to killings and deaths of hundreds of millions of people. The future is extremely grim for those people. So wars will happen, and America will get sucked into it, whether it likes it or not. And whether America does the right thing or not is another thing, but it will get sucked into it. America was handed over the problems that the Europeans left when they left these third world countries. Americans were not trained to run the world. Europeans were trained to run the world. Americans weren't, and they are very naive when they handle the world. But it's still, whatever they do, they are a force for stability in the world. Without America, the world would be much more unstable than it is today.
Right.
Much less.
I do agree.
Sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Just in case I said something wrong, without America, the world would be much more unstable.
All right, very true, very true. I do agree. Now, we've been talking for close to an hour, so I want to kind of, open up to the audience, those that are there chatting over there. But anybody have any more questions that you would like to call in and ask Mr. Bhandari directly? That'd be great. And so I saw a question earlier. Someone asked about artificial intelligence. What do you think the role in that will be in the days ahead? Seeing that a lot of major, fintech corporations are really gearing towards AI, and then when AI does kick in, that's going to leave less jobs for your average person to actually have. Then we're going to have the universal basic income situation. Give me your thoughts on how artificial intelligence may benefit humanity, but it also may take away from those that are less productive.
I am very excited about the future of technology, the future of biotechnology, and the future of artificial intelligence. This will increase wealth for the society. I also agree, and I'm a libertarian, I want to believe that the free market should lead to benefits for everyone. The reality is that a huge chunk of the society is going to be thrown out of the workforce, and that might include me in the future. So we have to accept that in the future, with technology continuing to improve, a lot of us will become unemployed. There will be problems because of that. Now, is universal basic income a solution? The reality, Mike, is that you don't want to encourage growth of population among people who are least productive. Also, human beings need something to wake up for. If you give them free money, and in fact, tests have been done on animals, if you feed them everything they want without expecting anything from them, they actually start fighting among themselves. Life wants a goal. Rats, mouse, and animals want a goal. Human beings need a goal. You can't just give them food and alcohol and hope that they would be content with that. They need to wake up for looking forward to something, and if not, they will create problems. So I don't know what the solution is, but I dislike the concept of universal basic income because it leads to immorality, and it will lead to increase in population exactly among those people where population should actually be reducing.
Right. I do agree. We all need something to strive for. And if you give it to us, then what are we we're here for? What are we working towards? So let's turn as we draw towards the end of our chat. I don't want to, because it's early morning there for you and it's late night here for me. And so once again, I appreciate you, taking time early to talk with me. But yeah, now let's shift a little bit onto the economy here in the United States of America. We've had, as of yesterday, interest rate hike, a quarter point. And so they're continually, incrementally a quarter point here and there, and they're projecting more quarters throughout the next couple of years. Give me your thoughts on how, does it even matter, being that we've been at, near zero for the last decade? Can they normalize rates? And, as they normalize and everyone else is dropping and quantitative easing, what are your thoughts for the economy moving forward as we move into 2018 with everything that you're aware of? And share with us anything I might have missed.
So I am not very optimistic about the future, the long-term future of the US, or maybe not even about the medium-term future of the US. But I'm increasingly optimistic about the short-term future of the US. Now, the reality is that the Fed rate have been increased slightly, but the real Fed rate, which is the nominal interest rate minus inflation, is still negative. So on your deposits, you are still earning a negative return on your investments. The reality behind this is that America is overregulated today. It's overregulated and overtaxed. There's too much government in the country. Trump is doing a lot of things in terms of reducing the taxes and in terms of reducing the influence of the government on the society. In my view, he's the first politician ever to be trying to do what he promised before elections. So in the short term, I think if he succeeds even slightly, that should lead to improvement of the economy of the US. So that will also mean that interest rates, in terms of real interest rates, will continue to creep up, because if money finds good investment opportunities, interest rates have to go up.
Right. Now, how about the idea that now, along with the interest rates, going up, because we are in a recovery, everything is great, job numbers are great, and along on top of that, there's a tax reform where they're trying to, cut taxes, so that it's going to be a gap of, revenue coming in and money being spent by our government. So adding to the national debt is going to add a lot of pressure. So I'm trying to figure out how they're going to work all these different angles while trying to still maintain the narrative that we are in a recovery. Everything is fine. We're going to have jobs in America. America's going to be great. So that's a lot of angles to cover. And we're broke as I don't know what. And we're living in a deficit. And it's going to get larger. So, share with me your thoughts on all that.
Well, Trump has no other option but to significantly reduce the size of the government. If he wants to cut taxes, he has to reduce social welfare, which he should, and he should cut the size of the government. It will not be easy to achieve that. Even for a dictatorship, these things are extremely, extremely difficult, because there will be a revolt against him if he cuts on social welfare or if he cuts the size of the government. He's trying.
Entitlements are killing us. So it's inevitable. Either they cut it now and you feel the pain, or they continue it on and you feel more pain. But people won't see it as that, unfortunately. I'm sorry. I had to mention that.
That's absolutely true. And that is why it is extremely difficult to cut social welfare and cut the size of the government, because in a democracy, the masses rule the government, and the masses think in terms of bread and circuses. They think in terms of what is now rather than what is in the future. They don't prepare themselves for the future. They don't have the capabilities or foresight to look into the future. The end result is that it will be very difficult for Trump to achieve all these things, but at least he's trying, and I think he will achieve at least bits and pieces of trying to improve taxes structure, reduce taxes, and reduce regulations, which should lead to a significant improvement in American economy in the short term. And if that happens, he might be able to balance the budget. Again, Trump, in my view, will not last for too long, because in a democracy and the changing intellectual climate of the US will mean that the leftist nanny government will reassert itself within the next few years. But in the short term, I'm very happy about Trump. I think he gives me some hope.
Right. I do agree. And he ran on a campaign of draining the swamp. And from like an alternative media standpoint, there's a lot of rumors and rumbling about all the things that's going on behind the scene that's not really getting reported on much, which are very promising, because if he wasn't in a position as president right now, a lot of things that we're hearing in alternative media wouldn't be the case, because it'd have been more of the same, if not probably war, if his opponent had gotten into office. But as we draw towards the end, last question, we're entering the end of the year, a couple more weeks into 2018. The Fed talks a good game about, preparing for the next crisis, the next recession. Do you see a recession coming anytime soon? And what are some of the possible policy that might be implemented to kind of keep it from turning into something like, a greatest depression type of thing? What do you see in the next year or two? Give us some closing thoughts on how this next year might shape out.
And Mike, you're talking about the US, or you're talking about countries outside the US?
The US.
Well, again, I think US has been in recession and depression kind of situation for the last couple of decades. Earnings of an average guy has fallen for the last many years now. People in many ways are worse off than they were in the past. I think Trump is trying to improve on those things, and America is still among the freest economies in the world. It is still among the best places in the world. If America improves slightly, a lot of American money that is outside the US will flood back into the US. It will reinvigorate the economy of the US in the short term. And I think Trump is trying to do a lot of things, and I'm very optimistic about it, which should lead to a short-term improvement in the American economy, let's say over the next 4 or 5 years. But there is no long-term future there, because Trump will be voted out eventually, because the masses, the mass psychology, the intellectual climate of the US is such that he will be voted out.
Well, I do agree, Jayant. And now, as we close it out, everyone, we got about 38 or so people chatting in the chat room. So no one calls in, then we'll end it there. But I thank you for spending your morning with us. As I mentioned, you're over in India. And so thank you for taking time for us here. Any last thoughts that you want to share? Any projects or anything that you would like for the viewers here to probably, help you out with, or follow you with, or point them to how they can stay in tune with what you have going on?
So we were talking about gold and cryptocurrencies today, Mike. A lot of people invest in gold and silver because they think it is money. A lot of people invest in cryptocurrencies because they are expecting cryptocurrencies to continue the performance cryptocurrencies have had in the last 1 year or so. My view is that don't take a fanatic position on any of these things. You don't know the future. You cannot predict the future. Diversify yourself internationally, diversify your investments, and always invest based on a rational, objective analysis. You should see a differential between value and price. You should find things to invest in where you pay a price which is much lower than the value you see. And you should be able to calculate that value. So if I can get a $10 thing for $5, that is what I want to invest in. It might still go to $0, but if I spread myself and diversify myself, overall, I will do better. My interest is to protect my wealth. My interest is to increase my wealth. My interest is not to make gold the next money. I'm just a single individual. What I do does not influence the world. So I just focus on what will increase my wealth and protect it.
Well, fair enough, Jayant Bhandari. I thank you for joining us, and thank you for sharing your wealth of knowledge. And good luck with everything you do in the future. Looking forward to definitely, hopefully, 2018, having you back on again as a guest here on RTD Live to get an update on what's going on in your area, wherever you may be at in the world at that point. So thanks for joining us, and look forward to definitely, continue to follow your work and stay in touch with you in the days ahead.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, Mike, and thanks for the audience for attending this talk.
Thank you.